with Hollywood, Playboy, the homosexual agenda, and the Disney empire. The movement Don started paved the way for Christians to boldly stand for truth and righteousness in a hostile culture. Watch Culture Warrior today for free. Visit culturewarrior.movie.
Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview. The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
All right, so we have seen the left and the fake news media change their rhetoric, the language, the word choice that they use in order to capture an idea and promote falsehoods and a false view of reality based on their political preferences, even their religious preferences, all of those things. And James Lindsay, who is, I've always said, is literally probably the smartest person that I've ever talked to, who has done a lot on critical theory topics and can see into the future in the sense of predicting what the left is going to do based on their agenda, their goals, and their preferred outcomes, has said and posted in January 2024, so this is a year and a half ago, said this: I keep saying critical immigration theory is coming. What's that going to look like? What is it going to do? When will it really drop? Let's think this through. And has an entire thread that's posted at Conceptual James, that's his X handle. And he talks about how critical immigration theory is going to be a global reach extension of critical race theory, which unfortunately is very American. The idea is simple, he says. Illegal immigrants are going to be characterized as oppressed, and national citizens are oppressors through a system of national citizenship. And so specifically, illegal immigrants and national citizens will be framed in an intrinsic conflict where the illegal immigrants are helped up and unjustly excluded from the benefits of national citizenship by a system of national citizenship itself, which would be systemic, immigration problems, something like that, like systemic conflict or whatever. But we're seeing this now manifest itself through how all of the fake news media and the left are trying to characterize immigrants as oppressed, and they don't even want to use this term illegal immigrant. They now say they're undocumented migrants. We've seen that for a while, but this whole system of oppressor versus oppressed is now in the context, of course, of due process. And we've talked about due process in the context of Trump and trying to actually enforce some of the immigration orders. But let's welcome in James Lindsay to talk more about this, because James, I think that you're spot on this, and I want to go a little bit deeper here into what critical immigration theory actually means and how we need to call it out for what it is.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jenna, for having me. It's good to talk to you again. And for anybody listening, I actually did a 5-minute PragerU video on this topic as well. They were intrigued by my thoughts here too, and so you can check that out. But yeah, critical immigration theory, like you read from my post a year and a half ago on Twitter, is just an extension into the realm of immigration from the thinking of critical race theory, and another thing that didn't get talked about as much publicly, which is called post-colonial theory. So there's already leftist architecture for how they do this, but critical theories around identity always work the same way. We figure out that there's some poor oppressed group. In this case, it's going to be primarily illegal immigrants, but it might even include legal immigrants by extension, and they are somehow oppressed by a system that doesn't value them and marginalizes them and doesn't see them as equals in a radically egalitarian way where it doesn't really matter your legal status or anything about you. Everybody's supposed to be perfectly equal in all ways. And so then it says, well, if they're oppressed, there must be a system oppressing them. And what is that system? Well, in this case, the system that's oppressing them is this idea of national citizenship at all. If we didn't have citizenship, well, nobody would be an illegal citizen, or illegal alien, I should say, is not a citizen. So if you just get rid of the concept of citizenship or transform it to include, as you said, undocumented migrants, I think for a while they even used the term new Americans, then you can overcome that oppression, that system that's unfair to them. And so it's always the structure. Now, as you said, it's coming up in the current circumstance because of the Trump White House going after and deporting as many illegal criminal aliens, particularly as he can, but also others. That's coming up in the context of that court fight, which is in terms of due process. So the left is not a fan of any constitutional protections for anybody at all times because they want to remove them. And so due process is getting dragged into the limelight, but interestingly, it's doing so in kind of the reverse way. So the left is using an appeal to due process rights to apply to illegal aliens, which technically don't have due process rights under the Constitution because they're illegal. They only have a semblance of due process until it's found out that they are illegal, at which point they no longer have due process. But what they're doing is framing this in a way that the political right will now come out wanting the deportations to take place and argue against due process. So they're getting their enemy to argue against a constitutional thing they want to get rid of through this kind of sideways manipulation of the bad circumstance of illegal immigration and the Trump administration's activity to get rid of it in the court's strategic response to get in Trump's way.
And I'm speaking with James Lindsay, who's the founder of New Discourses. You can follow him at Conceptual James on X. And you mentioned, that in this whole concept of critical immigration theory, the idea is to eliminate oppressor versus oppressed, and so then there's no national citizenship. That would suggest then that globalism and global citizenship is what they will be pushing for.
Yeah, that's the ultimate long-term goal. I did mention this specific political project of taking on due process through the reaction on the right, but the ultimate goal has always been something they call global citizenship. This goes back actually a fairly long way. It's already deeply embedded in our children's education, not just in public schools, but in any school that's taken up woke or United Nations-driven programming, which most of the private schools, especially the more elite ones, have. And the idea is actually we're all citizens of the globe. These national boundaries, national sovereignty get in the way of us being able to basically, as the United Nations has put it in the past, or representatives of the United Nations have put it in the past, of living in a global EU, a global European Union. So every country should basically just get rid of its sovereignty. Citizenship is actually in the way. We all should be able to just go wherever we want, whenever we want. And we're all global citizens. So global citizen becomes a replacement for the bad and oppressive and unfair and unjust idea of national citizenship, which is attached to national sovereignty, which advances a broader leftist global agenda, not just a kind of local power play.
Well, and so when the left is arguing for this as the end goal, and maybe not as openly as they will in the future, but then they're simultaneously arguing for due process protections for illegals, which is inherently an American national citizenship idea and protection because it goes directly to the U.S. Constitution, and so without the nation of America, the idea of American due process, it just dissolves. So how are they arguing for both simultaneously?
Well, I mean, each point is kind of just a move for expedience, but the problem is you're not going to get global citizenship anytime you have national sovereignty, and you're not going to get rid of American national sovereignty as long as you have the Constitution. So anywhere that they can create a wedge against the Constitution that benefits the longer-term plan, eventually, if they could, say, press into something like a constitutional crisis, that will have to be resolved. And the resolution that they would be able to present at the time is to say, well, there's this other way we could think about organizing people in the world, which is global citizenship. And national citizenship has caused all these problems. This is why immigration is a problem in reality. It's not because that, all of the different strains on the resources of the country or whatever else that are caused, or just the violation of the law. The problem is the law itself. And so the goal is to use this to chip away at the foundations of U.S. sovereignty, including its Constitution, and any piece they can knock off, however, even if it seems contradictory, is still a victory, because what they'll do is wait until it's a crisis and then propose the solution that they've had in wait, which, again, I reiterate, they've been already educating our children in for some time.
And this is just, yet it shows how the long-term agenda and the strategizing of the left continues to be laid, and so often conservatives and the right are totally oblivious to it. And so all we do really is kind of make fun of some of their linguistic gymnastics without necessarily recognizing the dangers implicit in what they're actually trying to do. And so beyond, calling them out on this and expressly discussing what their end goal is and calling it, critical immigration theory, which, I love how that's framed, because then people can immediately attach it to the broader goal of critical theory. What should we understand as conservatives about this push specifically in critical immigration theory, so that we can fight back on principles of genuine freedom, liberty, and not just America first, but nation sovereignty and borders, which are conservative, not just American ideals?
Yeah, the very concept of nation states matters. So I wish it was only that, just to make a quick point, I wish it was only that conservatives were making fun of what the left does with its linguistic gymnastics and manipulation and trickery, but in fact they fall for it a lot. Like I said with the point about due process, the left is setting up the right to be the weapon against due process. They're not going against due process themselves, they're calling for it. So they get to look like the people based in the Constitution, while they get the right to attack the thing they actually want destroyed. That's, as a naval intelligence officer told me one time, the essence of a political warfare or intelligence operation is to get your enemy to attack the thing you actually want destroyed by making your enemy think it's that your real target is the problem instead of you. And so they're very good at that. And so the first thing is that we have to slow down and be more discerning about what we're dealing with. I put out the concept of critical immigration theory, like you said, not just to attach it to the broader idea of critical theory and to critical race theory, which people understand pretty well now, but also to get people to understand it's a leftist manipulation with a strategy, with a purpose, which means we've all got to step back. And what you have to do is with leftist manipulations, with strategic political warfare operations like this, with intelligence operations to get you to strike your enemy's target for you, what you have to do is you have to be able to step back and see the bigger plan. And number one, you have to call out the bigger plan rather than simply reacting to what you're seeing and put in front of you, which is bait for you to react to in certain ways. And number two, you have to, at the level of, politicians, hopefully the Trump administration will understand this, you have to engage strategically to reverse their strategy. You have to act in a way that draws them out into making the mistakes that you can then capitalize upon, instead of giving them the opportunity to pin you into a position where they're capitalizing on your mistakes. So it requires having a strategic view. What normal people have to do is to not react to what they see directly in front of them and to try to understand the bigger play. With the left, there is always a bigger play. And if you don't understand how the bigger play works, then you'll react and they will take advantage of your reaction. So I framed it as critical immigration theory to get people to understand has the same kind of strategies, the same kinds of goals, the same kind of mentality that we saw with critical race theory and critical theory in general.
So with that, and that totally makes sense, how do we respond in a way that isn't just playing into their hands on the issue, for example, of due process? Because I've talked about this a lot on my radio show, that, and I agree with you that there's kind of a modicum of due process until you figure out the person's illegal. Then they don't get due process. They're not a citizen. They're subject to deportation just automatically. Nothing else. It doesn't matter. And yet we have a lot of lawyers and, I think well-meaning conservatives and all that debating how much due process and if if the law covers them, all kinds of things. And so it's like, on one hand, if we say, no, they don't deserve due process, then, well, how dare you? And that's kind of playing into this whole, you're bigoted, you're not even caring, and what about their families, the kind of humanitarian vein. But if you say, well, yes, they deserve some due process, then that's also playing into their hands for us being an advocate of due process. So where do we go?
You have to say simple, true things. This is always the correct answer. So the game is to get you, like you just described, caught in the leftist frame. So now you have conservative lawyers and judges, I'm sure, arguing about due process and how much due process a illegal alien is due, even though we know with the Constitution they aren't due any due process. So the framing that you would respond with is very simple. Every American citizen has due process of law guaranteed by the Constitution. When an arrest is made, we do not know if the person who's been arrested is an American citizen yet or not. And so the first step of the process has to assume due process during that investigation. Once that investigation has concluded and we see that this is an illegal alien, due process of law does not extend to them under the Constitution, and they do not have due process of law remaining. So you have to make an argument like that, which is a simple, true thing. American citizens have due process. And what you've actually done there is not only taken away the argument and taken it out of the leftist mystifying frame, but what you've also done is you've reasserted the need for American national sovereignty. It is American citizens under the American Constitution, which is an American sovereign nation, where due process of law under American law applies. Then you can have a kind of Trump-style quip. If they want due process of law in their own country, they can go home and have it there. And that, you can add something to that effect. But to frame it in terms of this is a intrinsic right of American citizens enshrined in our Constitution, and all we have to do is use due process up to the point where we determine citizenship for the purpose of protecting American citizens who might get mistakenly arrested, is all you have to say.
And that's a great response, because if we are always playing on the playing field that the left purports for us, then we will already be playing by their rules, and it's a losing game. And so when we talk about a critical immigration theory as a subset, really, of critical theory overall, what are some other angles of critical theory that we need to be looking out for as well, that the left is still perpetuating? Because right now, and I'm speaking with James Lindsay, who is the founder of New Discourses. You can follow him on X at Conceptual James. I'm still seeing a lot of the kind of MAGA Republican conservatism saying, the left is so disillusioned, they're off their game with messaging, they don't know how to reach out to anybody, and almost thinking we've effectively neutered the Democrat Party and the left, and so we don't need to be wary and on the lookout for some of the critical theory aspects that they're still clearly promulgating.
Conservatives thought the same thing in 1980 when Ronald Reagan was elected, and they thought that, the left had basically been defeated, and they kind of went to sleep. Well, what happens is the left, when it's in disempowered positions, goes underground and reorganizes. It will come back with different critical theories, not the same exact forms like critical race theory and queer theory that we've been exposed to. Those will still be present, but much less prominently. They're going to come out with new things. They'll shift to another frame of debate. In this case, it looks very much like they're going to shift to an economic frame of debate if we follow what AOC has been saying, for example. And so they are regrouping, and they are entrenching. They are digging their claws into schools, into every government agency, into every corporate entity that they can in more secret ways. If you talk to anybody that works in a government agency or entity that's not directly, under the finger of Donald Trump and his White House, you'll see that, their woke stuff is not gone away. It's increased. They complain about it all the time, and nobody seems to know how to fix it. So they're entrenching power, plus the blue states. So they haven't gone away. They're not even totally regrouping. I think they're, in fact, showing weakness. There's an old thing in The Art of War from Sun Tzu where he says, if your enemy is of choleric temper, irritate him, show him weakness so that he will overextend himself. And that seems to be what the Democrats are doing strategically now. If you think that they're in disarray rather than angry and regrouping and acting strategically, you misunderstand them. There is one further element of critical theory here that mixes into critical immigration theory, which is the global argument that the United States, the Western world, or the global North sometimes has exploited the rest of the world. And so that there's an intrinsic amount of deserving that, somebody, say, from Guatemala or South America, they would deserve to be able to come to the riches of the West. So they're going to have that element of an argument as well. And the answer, again, is to just reframe it in terms of citizenship, which is the thing that national citizenship, which needs to be defended. So again, the argument previously is American citizens deserve due process, and so anybody apprehended in case they're American gets due process until we find out they aren't. That's to protect American citizens and not to protect illegal aliens. And you just have to keep the argument there. And no, illegal aliens may have a bad thing going on in their own country, but they do not deserve to be here. Of course, the left is manipulating refugee status as well. So I think the Trump administration needs to get very strict about defining what constitutes a refugee and what doesn't. And of course, the tragedy in South Africa gives him an opportunity to do that in very stark lines, and it would be very controversial and I think productive of advancing this strategically.
Yeah, and also the loophole of asylum as well. I mean, we've seen that historically continue to be abused, and also this whole kind of toxic empathy, if I can put it that way, that the families of those who are detained and deported, even, MS-13 gang members, or now, this was recently in USA Today, the Boulder, Colorado suspect who injured and committed the act of atrocious terrorism in Boulder, Colorado against Jews. This is the headline from USA Today. Boulder suspect's daughter dreamed of studying medicine. Now she faces deportation. Habiba Soliman moved to the U.S. Hoping to study medicine. Then her father was charged with a hate crime in an attack aimed at peaceful Jewish demonstrators. And so obviously, what USA Today is doing is trying to say, oh, well, look at now how the alleged sins of the father are now impacting, this poor, helpless daughter who came to the U.S. with a dream and, nothing in her pocket. And it's like this wonderful kind of romanticized Hollywood movie, when really the focus and the emphasis should be on the actions of the father and how, if they are here illegally, they're subject to deportation.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the messaging around this is tricky because the left is extremely good at pulling the heartstrings and finding these kind of cases where this happens. But I think by emphasizing the fact of criminal activity and not just illegal immigration as an illegal activity, but when you have actual criminal activity like a violent attack of that kind, which it being labeled a hate crime is even kind of a mess. It was a violent murder of people using firebombs, which is horrific in every regard, of peaceful people who were gathering in a park for a demonstration. And so framing it out in terms of that the criminal aspects are absolutely going to be removed from our country with absolutely no tolerance because they're criminal, they don't belong here, and they're certainly causing disruptions. And then framing it that you're going to deal with these more nuanced cases, the daughter in this case, you're going to deal with that by giving them the option, if they have a visa that they haven't overstayed and they are not illegal, then they can stay. If they are illegal, I'm sorry, you're illegal, and you would best figure out a way to get legal status or you're going to have to go. It's simply at that point that's how we have to deal with the issue. The law has not been enforced for all kinds of bad, reasons that have been framed as compassion. The law must be enforced. We're in a dangerous point in the history of our country because we've been not enforcing too many laws. That also applies with, say, DEI with civil rights laws. They need to be enforced and enforced equally, not through disparate impact. Same kind of mentality has to be brought here. And as often as possible, the solution is to say simple, true things that reframe the entire discussion to the importance of national sovereignty and citizenship.
And so well said. James Lindsay, my special guest this morning. In just the last few minutes I have with you today, then we're seeing this not just from the political messaging problem, but also the legal opinions from activists on the bench. And so Where should the law go on this, and how can we best advocate for solid interpretation of the Constitution? Because I think that's a huge problem, is that we're seeing so many of these leftist activist judges and the forum shopping that goes along with that just allow for more and more circumventing of actual constitutional elements and protections.
Yeah, we have to understand that the left has played a very savvy game with the judiciary. First of all, they've very deliberately stacked the judiciary as often as possible with activist judges, and this turns out to be the very unfortunate playing field that we have to play on, which means you have to craft strategies around them, which some legal experts are good at doing and others are less good. This is going to be very important. We have to find reasons when it's possible, if we have an activist working as a judge, to be able to do review as to whether or not they are acting in good faith. That, of course, has to be done very cautiously, judiciously, and fully within the law. It can't be just kicking judges out, because not only is that wrong, but it will also be used against us at some point in the future. We also have to have a good judicial game. In addition to putting in good judges, which, of course, conservative administrations need to be doing, conservatives have been completely asleep at the wheel at something that the left is very good at, which is outreach. The left has been intentionally creating nonprofit organizations to miseducate judges on leftist topics, and they've been doing this effectively and very well for years. I've talked to a number of, famous conservative attorneys and some judges, and they tell me nothing of the sort is happening in conservative circles at all. Things like the Federalist Society are about as close as it comes. So what we need is, the same kind of thing. Judges are human beings as well, and we forget that sometimes because of their official role is supposed to be this neutral arbiter that they, sometimes can live up to. But they're human beings who have limited understanding of every topic that they have to weigh on, hopefully experts in the law. Therefore, they have to be educated on these specific topics, these specific manipulations, and be shown the same thing that everyday people are learning to see. So, creating some infrastructure to create that outreach to judges, I think, would be a massive step forward, so that the discussions on the bench are happening where they're informed from our side, not just heavily stacked to a misinformed position on the other.
So well said. Well, James Lindsay, really appreciate your time. We could continue talking about this for a lot longer, but that's why I would encourage all of you to follow James at Conceptual James on X. We need to understand what is really going on from a much deeper perspective, not just kind of this surface level, laughing at what the left is doing. They are strategic. They are intentionally challenging nations. They're challenging sovereignty. They're challenging due process rights. They're challenging everything that is conservatism and being built on a Judeo-Christian founding. So we need to understand all of this, and that's also why New Discourses, James Lindsay's organization, has a lot of really great resources, including his book. So I'd encourage you to go look at that as well, and we will be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
This is Abraham Hamilton III with AFR, and we're sending Bibles. Here's Michael with Bible League International.
I'm a new creation in Christ. I'm a new creation in Christ. Those were the words that came from the mouth and the heart of Mabel, the former village witch doctor that I gave a Bible to when I visited Tanzania, Africa. You see, she had lived 65 years in spiritual darkness, didn't know Jesus, had misled people through witchcraft, but now she had left all of that to follow Jesus, and she had her very own Swahili Bible. And today, through Mabel's transformed testimony, do you know hundreds have come to Christ on the continent of Africa, the part of the world where Christianity is growing in the greatest numbers, and yet 9 of 10 new believers go without a Bible. But enter the AFR listening family. Our goal by the end of June is to bless 16,000 waiting Christians. You've done that for 12,000. We've got 4,000 to go. So at $5 a Bible, $100 since 20, would you call 800-YES-WORD? That's 800-YES-WORD, or give it sendbiblesnow.org. Sendbiblesnow.org.
Let's see, if something costs less, a lot less, but people are actually happier with it, that sounds like something to look into, and that's MetaShare. Maybe you've heard joining MetaShare can save you or your family up to $500 a month, and that's huge, but it's also true. People are just happier with it. They love being part of something that reflects and promotes their values and what they believe in. MetaShare works, too. It's been around for 30 years now, and members have shared more than $7 billion of each other's bills. People love having telehealth and a huge nationwide PPO network, so yeah, really, you can save a ton and like it better. Imagine being happy with how you're taking care of your health care, whether you're self-employed or part of the gig economy, or you just want a plan that you're happy with. Here you go. You can call right now and get a price within 2 minutes. A very, very smart use of 2 minutes. Here's the number you need. It's 833-44-BIBLE. That's 833-44-BIBLE. 833-44-BIBLE.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Stern. Stand by for news and commentary next. There's nothing worse than a teacher triggered by Trump derangement syndrome. Cholla High School in Tucson, Arizona. A history teacher there in hot water after he compared President Trump to Adolf Hitler. It happened during a lesson on World War II. The teacher said Gen Zers who voted for Trump are low information voters. He said Trump had that in common with Hitler. A student recorded the lesson, turned the recording over to his father. Now, the student told News Channel 3 in Tucson he didn't appreciate his generation being called Nazis. The school district said they were investigating the matter. Not sure what there is to investigate. We've got the audio. The teacher has to be fired. No more excuses for Trump derangement syndrome. Our tax dollars should not be used to turn classrooms into indoctrination centers for the left. Be sure to order a copy of my brand new book. It's called Star Spangled Blessings, Devotions for Patriots, available at your favorite bookstore.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, there was a stat in an article from Answers in Genesis, and our AFR family will be well familiar with the Answers in Genesis ministry, but this was the headline. Gen Z, 8 in 10, yes, 8 in 10 would consider, quote unquote, marrying an AI. So the majority of Gen Z would marry an artificial intelligence app or robot or, whatever this survey says. So according to this piece in Answers in Genesis, some headlines just make you sigh, like this one. Even just 10 years ago, we would never have thought such a headline is possible. But yes, according to a recent survey, 80% of today's 20-somethings would consider marrying artificial intelligence, and slightly more believe they could form a deep emotional bond with one of these chatbots. And I have seen also some statistics as well that AI is now not just replacing, some analytical tools or, providing kind of a deep search of the web and data aggregate or, some of these useful things that artificial intelligence actually is designed to do. But that now some are suggesting that ChatGPT and Grok and some of these other bots are better therapists and pastors even. I mean, this is just wild. So let's welcome in Ryan Helfenbein, who is the executive director of the Standing for Freedom Center and vice president of communications at Liberty University, to break this down from a biblical worldview perspective. So Ryan, I mean, obviously marrying a chatbot is utterly ridiculous, goes against the design of Genesis 2, all of this. But I think that the deeper underlying problem is that human beings are clearly, I mean, the people in this survey that are saying they would even consider that, or, the chatbot is their therapist, they're suggesting that somehow human connection, advice, pastoral counsel, discipleship is insufficient. What does that tell us?
Yeah. It's interesting. So I think I'm like you, when I first read this, I was like, oh, come on, let me take a look at this. I went to the article over at Answers in Genesis, and it links to a website over at Mashable, and there were 2,000 respondents to this survey, and I don't know how scientific it was. And we have to remember that Gen Z is as far back as 1997 or as recent as 2012. So you've got some 13-year-olds responding to potentially a survey, asking this question. I think what it reveals is this detachment that so many young people have grown up with digital devices on digital platforms, separate from the rest of the world. They're sort of ensconced in digital realities, everything from entertainment to education, to how they socially connect with communities. It's all on digital devices. 95% of this is an estimate, but some 95% of the Gen Z generation has access to smartphones, again, as early as 13 years old. I have a 13 and a 14-year-old, Jenna. They do not have smartphones. That's a choice my wife and I have made. We're not doing that. But if you poll the majority of that generation, they're spending 6, 7, 8 hours on a smartphone daily. That's how they're accessing, not only information, that's not only how they're being entertained, that's how they communicate with their peers, with their friends. And through those digital devices comes all kinds of sordid disconnections, disarray. This is where they have access to pornography. This is where many of them are getting their news and information. So a lot of it can be misinformation. And through that, I believe that there is a loneliness and unfulfillment that many are experiencing, and they don't know the personal, what it is to have actual real community, physical connections, being in contact with real human beings face to face. And if you think about that generation too, being largely unchurched, not having any kind of spiritual community, many of them have not been given an alternative worldview, and so they haven't been presented with an understanding of what it is to be created in God's image and God's design and purpose for them, male and female, His ultimate purpose and design for intimacy and relationship through marriage, and God's design for sexuality and sexual intimacy. So young people, there is the sort of the Genesis 3 reality of understanding that we live in a fallen world, the Romans 1 reality of suppressing the truth and unrighteousness, and the great exchange, exchanging the creator for the created things, the creature, and worshiping the creature over the creator. And what we're seeing in this digital world is that people are treating AI as though it is God, or it is some kind of replacement for human connection, or even the Imago Dei, and it certainly isn't. It is just a tool. But it is scary to think that 2,000 respondents to a survey, some of them might even be jokingly or in jest responding, but either way, out of 2,000 respondents, 80% would say, hey, we consider this. We consider marrying an algorithm over an actual person.
Yeah, it is just bizarre. And what a great comparison. Ryan Helfenbein, my special guest this morning from Liberty University Standing for Freedom Center, that this is basically viewed by many as kind of this all-powerful, all-knowing tool, and that it will provide the correct moral and ethical guidance. I mean, almost like some kind of oracle, or some kind of, God replacement. And I think, beyond to kind of just the fantastical of marrying an AI or replacement of a therapist or whatever, I think to point that out, to say that, this is almost a God replacement in some view is very, very dangerous, because we know that we don't get truth apart from the person of Jesus Christ. And now, are there, analytics and some tools and all of that can provide factual data, correct, analysis, some of those things? Well, yes, but we always have to compare and contrast with the ultimate standard of truth, which is God. And so to have this type of divine-like sort of replacement in artificial intelligence is incredibly dangerous.
It absolutely is. You think about young people who could be fixated or addicted. Many of them are. Over 80% of the Gen Z generation report feeling stressed, feeling anxiety, when they are separated from their devices. For many, they're experiencing neurological chemical reactions, dopamine being released, for example, when it comes to video games, and those experiences, interaction, like I say earlier, with pornography. They're hardwired in the brain, to be addicted or to be connected to those devices. And so I think for a lot of them, you take the next almost consequential step. I wouldn't say necessary, but consequential, that they think I can form an intimate bond through some kind of artificial medium or artificial tool. And those tools only are designed to mimic human intelligence or mimic human behavior, but there is no such thing as true artificial intelligence. It's an algorithm, it's a data set, it has to be programmed, a human has to do it. And I'll just say this, Jenna, for your listeners on American Family Radio, we know that God, when he created man, he created mankind in the Imago Dei, male and female. He created us completely and wholly separate from the rest of his creation. And so the Darwinian naturalist worldview, even the worldview of Elon Musk and others, is that we simply evolved out of protons and molecules and atoms, and then eventually this creaturely distinction comes out, and Homo sapiens are just the apex predator of a Darwinian world, survival of the fittest. In the biblical worldview, in the biblical framework where God speaks and he reveals his truth, we know that is a lie, that we were created in his image. Artificial intelligence is a human creation. It will never best God's creation. There is no way that AI will supplant the Imago Dei. And that's where all these other guys who come up with these fantastical sort of narratives of the end of the world, or look, these bots will all of a sudden take over, and there'll be this awareness and sentience, and they'll have agency, and then they'll all of a sudden start to drive cars over the edge of the ravine with people in them or something ridiculous, an apocalyptic kind of vision. They do not understand the Imago Dei and the creator-creature distinction. And so they're coming to it from a naturalistic worldview. So man cannot create a God that bests God's design. And I think that's one of the things that we're even seeing. So young people, here's what I'll say going back to the survey. I think young people will see that there's brokenness at the end of this. This is a dead-end street, that AI does not provide the kind of intimacy, the kind of fulfillment, the kind of joy that we experience in human community, where we are enjoined by other men and women created and designed for a purpose, and that's ultimately to worship God and to love one another. There is no replacement for that, and intuitively we know that. But if we haven't experienced it, I think that's the sad thing about the Gen Z and even the Gen Alpha generation. Many of them are isolated and they don't experience real community. And that's why they can answer in the affirmative, yeah, I think I'll consider marrying this digital device.
Yeah, so well said, Ryan. And, it's tragic, actually, that we're so failing to disciple a large segment of the next generation, that they would turn to some of these alternatives to Christ and to the Bible and to church. And so how proactive should the church be in addressing things like this? I mean, there is obviously the main calling of the church is to disciple, to preach through Scripture. And these topics that are very timely, that obviously, artificial intelligence isn't mentioned specifically in Scripture, but the principles that you're speaking of are timeless. They're driven by biblical truth, and we need to correlate those to real-world issues that are facing the current generation today.
I think it's so timely that the church, especially when it comes to the young generation within the church, being discipled in the church, that parents in particular, grandparents, wherever they have influence, certainly pastors and youth pastors, all they can do is preach and disciple their congregants. Parents have to do the heavy lift of taking care of keeping their house in order. And when it comes to their children and when it comes to digital devices, you just have to ask the question, do you have these devices or do your devices have you? Are these simply tools and are you able to put them away? Or are you fixated and you're constantly being connected and you cannot put it down? Are you addicted? And I think that's the question. These are honest questions. These are kind of the questions we have to ask facing a mirror, and really looking deep into the soul and recognizing our pattern of behavior, our daily patterns of behavior. I think it's good to not give our children these devices. I think it's really good to limit screen time in general, whether it comes to television or iPads or whatever they're using, digital devices. Limit that screen time and that engagement and be very purposeful, especially when it comes to young people, about engaging with them personally in the real world. And they need to experience all of these things God has given us, sensory perception, taste, touch, feel, smell, all of those things for a purpose. And it's ultimately designed for His glory. Then we can experience the world that God has created, where He said in Genesis 1, it is good. And we have to remind ourselves, it is good. And we have to enjoy that creation. He has designed that not ultimately for our creaturely comfort, but to the ultimate end, to give praise and glory to God, that we can find joy in Him. And so I think we need community. That's what the survey reveals. And one of the first priority is obviously the family. Second priority is the local church. I would encourage people just to engage and immerse themselves in what is going on in their local church.
Amen and amen. Well, Ryan, this is why I always appreciate having you on, and this perspective that is talking about specifically the biblical worldview of some of these topics that that are just wild headlines to read, but we have to think through them clearly, soberly, and of course from a truthful perspective. So we will be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
We see and hear about the big public issues happening in our nation's capital, but what about the things that happen behind the scenes? That information can give us the whole story and help shape our opinions. That's why you need to listen to Washington Watch Weekend with Tony Perkins. He and his guests will give you all parts of the Washington news from a conservative Christian perspective. Catch Washington Watch Weekend Saturdays at 5:05 a.m. and 6 p.m. Central, and Sunday mornings at 3 Central on AFR.
Hey moms and dads, are you at your wit's end? Hi, this is Mark Gregston with Parenting Today's Teens. I'm so grateful for the partnership we have with American Family Radio. We share a common goal to bring hope to hurting families through the life-changing medium of radio. Be sure to listen Saturday afternoons at 4:30 Central on American Family Radio. Find help and hope for your family with Parenting Today's Teens.
Have you wanted to take your family to Kentucky to visit the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter, but just never took the time? Don't put it off any longer. Let 2025 be the year you check that off the list. In fact, you can make it an even more memorable trip when you join AFA at the Ark October 30th and 31st. On Thursday, you'll get transportation for a tour of the Creation Museum, and Friday will take you for a tour of the Ark Encounter. But that's just the beginning. Expand your knowledge of creation with a special dinner presentation on Thursday by Answers in Genesis astronomer Dr. Danny Faulkner. Friday, Dr. Georgia Purdom, Answers in Genesis Vice President of Educational Content, will help you dig deeper into the Bible. And Friday evening, enjoy dinner and a panel discussion with Tony Vitagliano, Walker Wildman, and Wesley Wildman, Vice Presidents of American Family Association. Visit afa.net/events today and click on AFA at the Ark. afa.net/events and click on AFA at the Ark.
The following is not an actor, but a real-life story from Trinity Debt Management.
Hi, my name's Neil. I have some advice for you if you've been trying to break free from credit card debt. You can start by doing what I did. Get your bills together and call Trinity Debt Management. Trinity is dedicated to helping people like me become debt-free. When I called, my first experience was a feeling of relief. My counselor was kind, and best of all, she didn't judge me. In just a few minutes, she helped me figure out a plan that consolidated all my bills into one lower monthly payment. This substantially reduced my high interest rates and put me on the road to success. In the end, I saved thousands in interest, and today, my credit card debt is a thing of the past.
If credit card debt has you down, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813.
My name is Neil. Take it from someone who's been there. Call Trinity and become debt-free for keeps.
1-800-788-1813.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And, as we've been talking about this wild story about artificial intelligence and how so many young people are kind of getting caught up in, frankly, this trap of relying so much on the analysis and opinion and bias of artificial intelligence. It just reminds me that we need to confine the tools of tech into an appropriate and biblical framework because, God gave us physical beauty to appreciate and to live within the physical realm as human beings. Obviously, we are not nihilistic, and we don't have the opposing perspectives that we are just physical beings, the spiritual doesn't matter. That is counter to biblical truth. But we also do not take the perspective as Christians that we are only spiritual beings and whatever we do in the physical doesn't matter. And I think a lot of that conflation is going on with a lot of young people today who are relying so much for their community, for their wisdom, for their daily life and structure and everything to be solely so online that they forget that we are supposed to live in the reality to which God has presented us. And, one of my favorites that I've mentioned here on air before that is just a wonderful documentary, and it's older, some of the tech, speaking of tech, some of the visuals and all of that are a little older, but it's totally worth watching for you and your family if you have time this weekend. I would highly suggest watching the documentary, The Privileged Planet. And this talks about how God so fine-tuned our universe so that we could come to understand our Creator through appreciating the beauty and the opportunity that He provides in our physical universe. And if you think about that, when we have the ability, even as human beings, to understand the concept of beauty and to appreciate it in nature, the fact that we can see in color, that we can see it all, that we can learn to experience our physical surroundings that point, as Psalm says, the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament shows His handiwork, that we can look at the majesty of the Rocky Mountains, that we can look at the beauty of the sand and the oceans, that we can see, like I did here in Florida just yesterday. We're in thunderstorm season, and there was a beautiful, just very bright and dramatic rainbow that was in the sky, and actually the double rainbow that sometimes you can see on a very clear day. And stopping to appreciate that beauty, especially what the rainbow actually means in a biblical sense, and a reminder of God's eternal covenants, that we can still see the symbol of that, and we can know and understand and appreciate our Creator through the physical universe, is really something that I think we shouldn't take for granted. And as much as, I appreciate technology because it gives me the opportunity to speak through the airwaves and to be with all of you who listen every weekday morning, and I'm thankful for technology. I love ChatGPT, I love using my smartphone, all of those things. Take a moment this weekend and maybe put all of the tech aside and just appreciate the beauty that God has given us through his creation and express a love for our Creator, because he gave us all of these things so that we could understand more clearly who he is and how much he loves us. So as always, you can reach me and my team, Jenna, at afr.net. Have a wonderful weekend.